My husband messaged me stuck at the office happy anniversary. Yet I was sitting just 2 tables away in the dimly lit dining room of a five-star steakhouse, watching him passionately kiss his mistress. I am Sasha, 34 years old, and I thought I knew the man I married. I thought I knew my place in a family that constantly belittled me. But the betrayal I witnessed that night was only the surface of a massive financial conspiracy designed to destroy me. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever discovered a loved one plotting your downfall. You will definitely want to hear how I turned their trap into a federal prison sentence. Growing up in an affluent neighborhood in Atlanta meant everything was about appearances. My mother, Vivian, cared more about her social standing in the church and our community than she did about her own daughter's happiness. When I married Derek 5 years ago, my family acted like I had won the lottery. Derek was a handsome investment director who charmed my mother and pandered to my brother Terrence. They viewed me as a simple administrative assistant who desperately needed a strong man to manage her life. They had no idea that I was a forensic accountant running my own covert crisis management firm. I hid my success because ambitious women in my family were punished while submissive wives were rewarded. My mother constantly praised my brother and his wife while treating me like an embarrassment. Tonight was supposed to be our 5th wedding anniversary. Derek told me he had a massive corporate merger to finalize and could not make it to our dinner reservation. I decided to go anyway to enjoy a quiet meal by myself. I wore the black silk dress he claimed was too plain and ordered a glass of expensive red wine. The restaurant was bustling with jazz music, the smell of roasted garlic and the clinking of crystal glasses. The lighting was low, creating an intimate atmosphere for the wealthy patrons. Then the host seated a couple just 2 tables away from my booth. It was Derek. He was not wearing his work suit. He wore a crisp linen shirt, and he was holding hands with a stunning woman, dripping in designer jewelry. I sat frozen in the velvet booth. My phone buzzed on the table, illuminating the screen with his lie about being stuck at the office. I watched as he leaned across the white tablecloth and kissed her. It was not a casual peck. It was the kind of kiss a man gives a woman he is deeply infatuated with. My chest tightened. My breathing grew shallow. My hands began to shake slightly, but not from sadness. Every condescending remark Derek had ever made about my budget or my simple lifestyle flashed through my mind. He always claimed we needed to save money for our future while he was clearly funding a secret life with someone else. Anger replaced my shock. A hot, pulsing rage surged through my veins. I am not the weak, submissive woman my family forced me to portray. I refused to run to the bathroom and cry. I refused to go home and pack a bag. I wanted public humiliation. I reached for my heavy crystal wine glass filled to the brim with dark red Cabernet. I gripped the stem tightly. I planned to march over to their table, dump the wine over his perfectly styled hair, and loudly introduce myself as his wife to the entire restaurant. I slid out of the booth and took one step toward their table. Suddenly, a large hand clamped down firmly around my wrist. I gasped and spun around, ready to shout at the waiter. But it was not a waiter. A tall, imposing man in a tailored charcoal suit stood beside me. His jaw was clenched, and his dark eyes were fixed with a terrifying intensity on Derek and the woman. "Let go of me," I whispered fiercely, pulling my arm. The man did not loosen his grip. He stepped closer, leaning down so his mouth was near my ear. His voice was a low, calm rumble that cut straight through the jazz music playing in the background. "Wait," he whispered. "Do not make a scene. A glass of wine is cheap revenge." I glared at him, furious. "Who are you?" "I am Elias," he replied. "The woman your husband is kissing is my wife." I stopped, struggling. The air left my lungs. "The real drama is just beginning, Sasha," he whispered. "Your husband just wired $500,000 from your family trust fund to my wife's offshore account." I stared at him, unable to process the words. $500,000 was not just money. It was the inheritance my grandfather left me. It was the safety net I protected for years. I looked past Elias at the table where Derek was now laughing and pouring more champagne for the woman who was stealing my future. My legs felt weak, but Elias guided me back to my booth and sat across from me. He reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a sleek black smartphone. He slid it across the table. I looked down at the bright screen. It was a secure banking application showing a completed wire transfer. The origin account was the family trust I set up 3 years ago. The destination account was an offshore holding company registered under the name Vanessa. My chest heaved as I realized the depth of the betrayal. Derek did not just cheat on me. He forged my signature and bypassed the security protocols I thought were impenetrable. I wanted to scream. I wanted to march over there and flip their table over. I wanted to shatter every crystal glass in this restaurant. But Elias leaned forward and locked his cold gaze with mine. "Scream if you want," he said evenly. "But if you confront them now, Derek will know you are aware of the missing funds. He will empty the rest of the accounts before tomorrow morning. Right now he thinks you are clueless. We need to keep it that way." I took a deep breath, forcing my racing heart to slow down. I looked at Elias. "Who are you exactly?" "I am a corporate litigation attorney," Elias replied. "I specialize in hostile takeovers and asset recovery. I have been tracking my wife and her suspicious spending for 2 months. She thought she was clever hiding the money in a shell company, but she is sloppy. When I traced the incoming funds, I found your husband. And then I found you. But there is one thing I do not understand." Elias crossed his arms and studied my face. "I ran a background check on you, Sasha. Your family portrays you as a simple administrative assistant. Your mother tells everyone in your community that you file paperwork for a logistics company. So how does a low-level admin assistant have sole access to a multi-million-dollar private trust fund? It does not make sense. You should not even know what an offshore holding company is." A bitter smile crossed my face. My family has spent my entire life underestimating me. My mother Vivian worships my brother Terence because he is a man. She bends over backwards for my sister-in-law Chloe because she comes from old money. In my family, ambitious women are considered a threat. If I told them the truth, they would have demanded I fund my brother and his endless failed business ventures. So I let them believe I was just a quiet secretary making minimum wage. I let Derek play the role of the big, strong provider. I leaned across the table, matching the intensity in Elias' eyes. "I am not an administrative assistant. I am a forensic accountant. I own a private crisis management firm downtown. I spend my days tracking stolen assets for massive corporations and dismantling financial fraud rings." Derek thinks he outsmarted a naive housewife. He does not realize he just robbed the auditor. Elias raised his eyebrows. A genuine smile of respect finally broke through his cold exterior. He picked up his phone and tucked it back into his pocket. "Then we have a unique opportunity," he said. "I want my wife to leave this marriage with absolutely nothing, and you want your money back. If we work together, we can destroy them both legally and financially. We can strip them of every asset and let them take the fall for federal wire fraud. But it requires you to play the devoted wife for a little longer. Can you do that?" I looked over at Derek one last time. He was kissing her neck. Any love I ever had for him evaporated, leaving behind only cold, calculated resolve. "I can play the part," I said. Suddenly, a loud ringing pierced the tension. It was my cell phone vibrating violently against the wooden table. The caller ID flashed my mother Vivian. I swiped the screen to answer. Her shrill voice echoed through the speaker before I could even say hello. "Sasha, where are you?" she screamed. "You need to get home immediately. I am hosting the family anniversary dinner in 2 hours, and you have not even set the tables. Do not embarrass Derek tonight, Sasha. Hurry up and get back to this house right this exact minute." I ended the call and slid my phone into my purse. I looked across the table at Elias. "I have to go," I said quietly. "Let him believe he has won tonight." Elias nodded, handing me a sleek black business card with a single private number on it. "Call me when the dinner is over," he said. We have a lot of work to do. I walked out of the restaurant and drove straight to my mother's sprawling estate in the suburbs. The house was a massive brick colonial with perfectly manicured hedges and a grand circular driveway. It was a physical monument to my family obsession with wealth and appearances. I pushed open the heavy front door and heard my mother's heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Vivian stormed into the foyer, her face tight with disapproval. "Look at you," she scolded, crossing her arms. "Is that what you are wearing to your own anniversary dinner? A plain black dress. You look like you are going to a funeral, Sasha. I told you to wear the blue silk gown Derek bought you for Christmas. You know how much he likes it when you dress up for him." I swallowed the bitter taste in my mouth. I wanted to tell her that Derek was currently unwrapping another woman out of her expensive lingerie, but I kept my face blank. "I did not have time to change, Mom," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "I was out running errands." "Running errands?" she scoffed. "What errands could you possibly have? You work at a desk all day filing papers. Derek is the one out there grinding in the financial district, paying your mortgage and keeping a roof over your head. The least you could do is make an effort to look pretty for him when he comes home exhausted. You are lucky he puts up with your lack of ambition. Do not ruin this dinner for him." Before I could formulate a polite response, the heavy front door swung open again. Derek walked in. He loosened his expensive silk tie and let out a loud, dramatic sigh. He looked like the picture of a hard-working, devoted husband returning to his adoring family. But as he stepped closer, I could smell the faint trace of expensive vanilla perfume mixed with steakhouse garlic. It was Vanessa perfume. Derek smiled his charming, practiced smile. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, kissing my cheek. His lips felt like ice against my skin. "I am so sorry I am late." The merger negotiations were brutal. We were stuck in the boardroom all evening. He reached behind his back and produced a bouquet of flowers. They were clearly purchased from a gas station on his drive over. The edges of the red carnations were already browning, and the plastic wrapping crinkled cheaply in his hand. "Happy anniversary," he said, handing them to me. My mother clasped her hands over her chest, letting out a dramatic gasp. "Oh, Derek, you are just too wonderful," she fawned, practically pushing me aside to hug him. "Working yourself to the bone for this family, and still managing to be so romantic. Sasha, put those in water right now. Do not just stand there staring." I took the cheap carnations. "Thank you, Derek," I said, forcing the corners of my mouth into a wide, grateful smile. "They are beautiful. I appreciate you working so hard for our future." The lie felt like bitter acid on my tongue, but Derek beamed with pride. He loved playing the savior. He patted my shoulder condescendingly before following my mother into the formal dining room. I stood in the kitchen for a moment, gripping the stems of the flowers so tightly the plastic wrapping snapped. Then I tossed them carelessly onto the counter and walked into the dining room to play my part. We sat around the massive mahogany dining table. My mother had prepared a lavish spread of roasted lamb and expensive wine. Throughout the meal, Derek boasted endlessly. I sat quietly chewing my food and nodding at all the right intervals. I was the perfect submissive wife. As the dinner wound down, Derek took a sip of his wine and cleared his throat. "Vivian," he began, using his most serious professional voice. "I have been looking over the family estate portfolio. The market is getting volatile, and I am worried about the security of the grandfather trust fund." My mother leaned forward, instantly concerned. "What do you mean, Derek? Is the money safe?" "It is fine for now," Derek reassured her smoothly. "But we need to be proactive. Tomorrow we must absolutely restructure the family estate deeds. I am bringing your brother Terrence and his wife Chloe into the conversation to consolidate the legal power." Right on cue, the heavy brass knocker on the front door echoed through the house. My mother clapped her hands in sheer delight as my brother Terrence and his wife Chloe strutted into the dining room. Chloe was dressed in a pristine white silk dress that screamed generational wealth. She tossed her perfectly styled blonde hair over her shoulder and immediately took the seat next to my mother, completely ignoring my presence. Terrence followed closely behind her, carrying a small, brightly wrapped gift bag. He looked over at Derek with absolute admiration before quickly taking his seat next to him. "Happy anniversary, sweetie," Chloe said, sliding the small gift bag across the mahogany table toward me. Her voice dripped with that thick, syrupy sweetness she always used when she was about to deliver an insult. "Go ahead and open it." I picked up the bag and pulled out a plastic bottle of generic drugstore body lotion. It was the kind you find in a discount bin. "I know you cannot afford the luxury spa treatments I get," Chloe continued loudly, ensuring everyone at the table was listening. "So I naturally thought this might just help your dry skin issues tonight. Sitting under those cheap fluorescent lights in your little cubicle all day must just absolutely ruin your complexion. You really should take better care of yourself for Derek. He is such a handsome, successful man." I stared at the cheap plastic bottle in my hand. The urge to empty its contents onto her expensive silk dress was overwhelming, but I forced a tight, appreciative smile. "Thank you, Chloe," I said softly. "How incredibly thoughtful of you." My mother beamed, clearly thrilled by the exchange. "Now, back to the family estate deeds," Vivian interrupted, steering the conversation exactly where Derek wanted. Chloe leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "Derek is absolutely right, Vivian," Chloe said, looking at my husband with a conspiratorial smirk. "The market is far too aggressive right now. Sasha, you really need to sign your portion of the grandfather trust over to Terrence and Derek. Men just handle investments so much better than we do. You do not want to stress your pretty little head over complex financial portfolios and market fluctuations. It is simply not your area of expertise." Terrence nodded vigorously, chewing his steak. "Chloe is completely right, Sasha," he said, pointing his fork. "Derek and I have the business degrees. We know how to leverage capital. You just file paperwork. If you leave your shares under your own name, you could accidentally mismanage them and bankrupt the family. We are just trying to protect you from yourself." Terrence took a large gulp of his wine before continuing. "You have always been bad with money, Sasha. Derek is offering to carry the burden for you. You should be thanking him instead of hesitating." I looked around the table at my family. My mother was nodding in agreement, her eyes silently warning me again tonight. My husband, the man who just transferred $500,000 to his mistress, was looking at me with feigned concern, acting like the ultimate protector. My brother was blindly following the instructions of his manipulative wife, totally unaware he was a pawn. And Chloe, the heiress who constantly weaponized her white privilege against me, was sitting there with a smug, triumphant smile. They genuinely believed I was a naive, helpless idiot. They thought I would blindly hand over the keys to my inheritance because they intimidated me. I took a slow sip of my cold ice water, staying quiet. "I will certainly think about it," I said, keeping my voice submissive and soft. "It sounds like a very complicated process, and I do not want to make any mistakes. I trust Derek to explain it to me later." Derek reached over and patted my hand, his touch sending a sickening shiver down my spine. "Do not worry, sweetheart," he said smoothly, his voice dripping with false reassurance. "I will have the legal paperwork drawn up for you by tomorrow morning. All you will have to do is sign on the dotted line." I smiled at him, looking very grateful. I excused myself and walked into the guest bathroom, locking the heavy wooden door. I turned on the sink faucet to mask any noise and pulled my secure laptop from my oversized purse. Sitting on the toilet lid, I booted up my proprietary forensic accounting software. Chloe always bragged about her wealthy family. I ran a deep background check, tracing encrypted banking records and property registries. Within minutes, I uncovered a massive hidden financial leak. Chloe family was secretly $15 million in debt. Worse, Derek was illegally funneling my trust fund money directly into their failing real estate project. I closed my laptop and slid it back into my oversized purse, taking a deep breath to steady my racing heart. I flushed the toilet and washed my hands before walking back out to the dining room. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of fake smiles and polite nods. I played my role flawlessly, letting Derek and Terrence boast about their business acumen, while Chloe chimed in with her subtle insults. When the evening finally ended, Derek and I drove back to our house in silence. He kept his hands on the steering wheel, looking incredibly pleased with himself. As soon as we walked through the front door of our home, Derek dropped his keys on the entryway table and turned to face me. His expression shifted from arrogant satisfaction to deep manufactured concern. He walked over and gently placed his hands on my shoulders, looking deeply into my eyes. "Sasha, we need to talk about something serious," he said, his voice low and soothing. "I did not want to bring this up in front of your mother and ruin the anniversary dinner, but there was an issue today with your personal savings account." I widened my eyes, forcing a look of absolute panic onto my face. "What do you mean, Derek?" I asked, making my voice tremble slightly. "Is my money gone?" He pulled me into a comforting hug, resting his chin on the top of my head. I could smell Vanessa perfume lingering on his collar. "Do not panic, sweetheart," he whispered, stroking my hair. "The bank flagged some highly suspicious activity on your account this morning. Someone tried to compromise your information. But because I monitor our finances so closely, I caught it immediately. I had to act fast to protect you, so I transferred all of your personal savings into a secure offshore holding account under my management. It is just for safekeeping until the bank clears the security breach. It took every ounce of self-control I possessed not to push him away and slap him across the face. He was staring right at me, lying with such practiced ease. He had stolen my money to fund his mistress and his sister-in-law bankrupt family, and now he was demanding my gratitude for it. "Oh my goodness, Derek," I breathed, leaning into his chest and clutching his shirt. "Thank you so much. I do not know what I would do without you looking out for me. You always know exactly how to handle these stressful situations. I would have been completely lost." He kissed my forehead, entirely convinced by my performance. "That is what a husband does, Sasha," he said proudly. "You just focus on relaxing. I will handle all the complicated banking issues. Why do you not go upstairs and get ready for bed? I need to make a few late-night calls for the merger." I nodded meekly and walked up the carpeted stairs to our master bedroom. As soon as I closed the bedroom door, I dropped the helpless wife act. My face hardened into stone. I walked into the walk-in closet, turned on the dim overhead light, and pulled out my secret phone. I immediately typed a secure message to Elias. "Derek just gave me his cover story," I typed quickly. "He claims my savings account was compromised, and he moved the funds for my own protection. He is feeling incredibly confident. Have you traced the exact destination of the offshore wire transfer yet?" I sat on the floor of the closet waiting. 2 minutes later, my screen illuminated with a reply from Elias. He sent a series of encrypted documents followed by a text message. "I just cracked the shell company my wife is using," Elias wrote. "Vanessa is not just holding the money, she is acting as a silent investor. She immediately routed your $500,000 into a commercial real estate development group." I stared at the screen, my mind racing. I quickly typed back, asking for the name of the development group. Elias' response came through a few seconds later, and it made my blood run cold. "It is the Oak Ridge Development Corporation," Elias replied. "I ran the board of directors. The primary shareholder is your sister-in-law, Chloe. Her family is using your stolen trust fund money to illegally bail out their failing luxury resort project. And Derek is getting a massive cut of the profits for funneling the cash." I lowered the phone in the dark closet. The web of betrayal was so much larger than a simple cheating husband. Derek, Terrence, Chloe, and Vanessa were all working together to bleed me dry. But they had made one fatal miscalculation. They left a paper trail. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of the front door clicking shut. Derek had left early, claiming he had an emergency breakfast meeting with the board of directors. I knew he was likely meeting Vanessa or finalizing the stolen funds transfer with Chloe. I threw on a simple robe and walked downstairs to make coffee. Before the machine even finished brewing, the doorbell rang sharply, echoing through the quiet house. I opened the door to find my mother, Vivian, standing on the porch holding a thick leather briefcase. Beside her stood a balding man in an expensive gray suit, whom I immediately recognized as Mr. Sterling, the longtime family attorney. My mother pushed past me without waiting for an invitation. She marched straight into the kitchen and dropped the heavy briefcase onto the granite island. "Sit down, Sasha," she ordered, her voice carrying that familiar tone of absolute authority. "Mr. Sterling has cleared his entire morning schedule for us, and we do not have time to waste." I pulled my robe tighter around myself and sat on the tall bar stool, playing the role of the confused and intimidated daughter. "What is going on, Mom?" I asked, looking nervously between her and the lawyer. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat and popped the golden latches on his briefcase. He pulled out a thick stack of legal documents printed on heavy watermarked paper. He slid them across the granite counter toward me, along with a silver fountain pen. "As Derek discussed with you last night, the market is incredibly unstable right now," Mr. Sterling said, using the slow, patronizing tone people reserve for small children. "Your mother and your husband have agreed that it is in the best interest of the family estate to consolidate the voting rights of the grandfather trust. We just need your signature right here to transfer your proxy power to Derek and Terrence." I stared at the thick stack of papers. They were not just asking to manage the investments. Transferring my proxy power meant giving them the legal authority to liquidate the trust entirely without my consent. It was the final step they needed to legally drain every single penny I had left. I looked up at my mother. "Mom, I do not know about this," I said, letting my voice waver. "Grandpa left those shares to me specifically. Maybe I should have an independent accountant look over this first, just to be safe." Vivian slammed her hand down on the counter, making me jump. "Do not be ridiculous, Sasha." She snapped, her eyes flashing with anger. "You do not need an accountant. You have a husband who works in finance and a brother who knows how to run a business. You are acting incredibly selfish right now, and frankly, I am exhausted by your constant need to make things difficult." She leaned over the counter, glaring down at me. Her next words were chosen carefully, designed to hit every insecurity she had instilled in me since childhood. "Need I remind you of your little rebellious phase in your 20s, Sasha?" Vivian asked, her voice dripping with poison. "You vanished into the city. You embarrassed this family by refusing to marry the men we introduced you to, and you wasted years pretending you were independent while Terrence was actually building a legacy. We covered up your failures. Derek married you despite your lack of ambition. You owe this family, Sasha. You owe your husband. Do not sit here and pretend you know better than the men who are graciously trying to protect your future." I looked down at the documents, feeling a cold, calculating calm wash over me. She truly believed her emotional blackmail was working. She thought bringing up my 20s, my hidden years of secretly building a multi-million-dollar firm, would shame me into submission. Mr. Sterling tapped the silver pen against the paper. "Just sign on the dotted line, Sasha," he urged. "It will take 2 seconds, and then you can go back to worrying about your household chores." I reached out with a trembling hand and picked up the heavy silver pen. I let a single tear slide down my cheek for dramatic effect. "Okay, Mom," I whispered. "If you say this is what is best for the family, I will do it." I pressed the pen to the paper, but I did not use my standard legal signature. In the world of forensic accounting, there is a specific way to sign a document when you are being held under duress or coerced. I deliberately misspelled my own middle name, turning the letter E into a sloppy, looped A. I disconnected the first and last letters of my surname, breaking the continuous stroke required for biometric verification. To my mother and her corrupt lawyer, it looked like a messy signature from a crying woman. But to a federal judge and any competent auditor, it was an internationally recognized distress signal that immediately rendered the entire legal contract completely null and void. I pushed the signed papers back across the counter. Vivian snatched them up with a triumphant smile. "Good girl," she said, patting my cheek condescendingly. "I am glad you finally decided to be useful." I watched them walk out of my house carrying the useless documents. Instead of fighting, I had just handed them the exact rope they would use to hang themselves. As the heavy front door clicked shut behind my mother and her lawyer, I remained seated at the kitchen island. I heard the lock turn. A moment later, the door from the attached garage swung open. Derek walked in, followed closely by my sister-in-law, Chloe. He had lied about having a breakfast meeting. They had been waiting in his car the entire time just to make sure I actually signed the proxy documents. I slipped off the bar stool and quietly backed into the walk-in pantry, leaving the kitchen door slightly ajar. Derek tossed his keys onto the counter and let out a loud, arrogant laugh. "I told you she would do it," he gloated. Vivian played her perfectly. Bring up her past failures and Sasha folds like a cheap lawn chair every single time. She was practically crying when she signed it. Chloe laughed, a sharp, grating sound that echoed off the marble countertops. "God, she is so incredibly stupid," Chloe mocked. "I honestly thought she might put up a fight when she mentioned getting an accountant. But she really believes you are just trying to protect her little nest egg." "How much is the total liquidation value, Derek?" "With the proxy power, I can drain the remaining 3.5 million by Friday," Derek replied smoothly. "I will wire the first installment to the Oak Ridge account this afternoon, so your family can pay off the zoning inspectors. Then I will funnel the rest through Vanessa's shell company." Chloe sighed dramatically. Good. My father was starting to panic. If the bank foreclosed on the Hamptons estate, the sheer social embarrassment would literally kill my mother. Just keep playing the devoted husband, Derek. A few more days, and we never have to deal with your pathetic little wife again. I stood in the dark pantry listening to them celebrate my financial ruin. My hands were not shaking. I did not feel the urge to cry. I felt a cold, absolute clarity. They were completely blinded by their own arrogance. I waited until they walked into the living room to pour themselves celebratory drinks. Then I slipped out the back door, walked to my car, and drove straight to the financial district downtown. My secret office was located on the 30th floor of a sleek glass skyscraper. The frosted glass doors bore the discreet logo of my crisis management firm. I walked past the reception desk, ignoring the surprised look of my assistant. I had not been in the office for 3 days. I strode directly into the main conference room and activated the frosted privacy glass. I called in my top 3 forensic auditors. "Drop every other client case right now," I ordered as they took their seats. "I need a complete asset teardown on the Oak Ridge Development Corporation. I want every bank statement, every offshore account, and every shell company linked to their board of directors. Dig into their private debt structures. Find the bleeding wound." My team did not ask questions. They immediately opened their laptops and began pulling encrypted financial registries. For the next 4 hours, the room was silent, except for the frantic clicking of keyboards and the hum of the servers. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the city, piecing together the timeline of their fraud. At exactly 2 in the afternoon, my lead auditor, Marcus, looked up from his screen. His eyes were wide. "You found something?" I asked, walking over to the conference table. Marcus turned his laptop toward me. "Oak Ridge is not just failing Sasha, it is a massive financial sinkhole. Chloe family has leveraged every single asset they own to keep it afloat. They have a hidden balloon loan that matures in exactly 7 days. The principal balance is $15 million. They do not have the liquidity to pay it. If they miss the deadline, the bank will foreclose on their primary asset, which was put up as collateral." I leaned closer to the screen, tracing the legal documents with my finger. "What is the collateral, Marcus?" "The historic Hamptons estate," Marcus replied. "The one Chloe constantly brags about at every social event. It is heavily mortgaged. They are stealing your trust fund money, trying to make a partial payment to extend the grace period." A slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. Derek and Chloe had made a fatal mistake. I did not just want to expose their fraud, I wanted to completely obliterate them. "Do not report anything to the authorities yet," I told Marcus. "Contact the holding bank immediately. Tell them my firm is representing an anonymous buyer. I want to purchase their entire debt portfolio today. Initiate the acquisition paperwork now. I am going to become their ultimate creditor." I left my firm behind and walked out into the busy downtown streets. The afternoon breeze felt refreshing against my skin. I had set the wheels in motion to buy out the entire debt portfolio of Chloe family. The trap was armed. But as I walked toward my car, a sudden pang of guilt tightened my chest. Terrence was arrogant, entitled, and deeply manipulated, but he was still my older brother. We had shared a childhood under the crushing weight of our mother expectations. Before I let the hammer fall completely, I needed to give him one final chance to walk away from the blast radius. I pulled my phone from my purse and sent him a quick text asking to meet for a late lunch at a quiet cafe near his office. He replied with a curt agreement stating he only had 30 minutes to spare. I arrived early and secured a secluded booth in the back of the restaurant. When Terrence finally walked through the door, he was checking his expensive watch and looking annoyed. He slid into the booth opposite me and immediately signaled the waiter for a black coffee. "Make this quick, Sasha," he said, checking his phone screen again. "Derek and I have a major conference call with the Oak Ridge board in an hour. We are finalizing the capital injection." I folded my hands tightly on the table, looking at him. "Terrence, I need you to listen to me very carefully." I began, my voice low and urgent. "You need to pull out of the Oak Ridge project today. Do not sign any more documents and do not transfer any more family funds." Terrence stopped looking at his phone and stared at me. His annoyance instantly morphed into a sneer of utter contempt. "Excuse me?" he scoffed, leaning back in the booth. "Did my little sister, the administrative assistant, suddenly become a real estate analyst overnight?" I ignored his condescending tone, pressing forward. "I am telling you, as your sister, Terrence, the numbers do not add up. Chloe family is not as wealthy as they pretend to be. The entire development is a financial sinkhole. If you attach your name and your assets to this, you are going to lose everything. Derek is not protecting the family. He is using you." Terrence slammed his hand flat against the wooden table, making the silverware rattle. "Shut your mouth, Sasha," he hissed, his voice thick with sudden rage. "I am absolutely sick and tired of your endless jealousy. You have been insecure about Chloe since the day I introduced her to the family. You cannot stand the fact that she comes from genuine generational wealth, while you spent your 20s failing at every venture you attempted." He leaned closer, his eyes narrowed and cold. "And do not even get me started on Derek," he continued. "Your husband is out there building an empire for us, while you sit at home contributing absolutely nothing. You are a bitter, ungrateful woman. Mom warned me you might try to sabotage this deal because you cannot handle seeing me succeed. You are exactly who she said you were." I sat perfectly still, absorbing his venom. He was regurgitating the exact toxic narrative my mother had fed him for years. I had offered him a lifeline, and he was proudly tying it into a noose. I looked at the man sitting across from me and realized my brother was gone. He was nothing more than a puppet for my mother and a cash cow for his racist wife. "I will not warn you again, Terrence," I said softly, my voice devoid of any remaining warmth. "When this collapses, it is going to take down everyone involved." Terrence let out a loud, arrogant laugh that drew the attention of the nearby tables. "Nothing is going to collapse, Sasha," he mocked, shaking his head. "In fact, I am so confident in Derek and Chloe that I just made the biggest move of my career this morning." He picked up his coffee cup, taking a slow, deliberate sip before setting it down with a smug, triumphant smile. "I just took out a second mortgage on my own house," he revealed proudly. "I pulled out every drop of equity I have and wired an additional $800,000 directly to Derek for the project. By next month, I will be a millionaire, and you will still be begging your husband for an allowance." I just stared at him in absolute silence. He had just handed Derek and Vanessa almost $1 million of his own money. The trap was no longer just going to catch my husband and my sister-in-law. My brother had walked right into the trap and locked the door behind himself. I left the cafe and walked to my car, feeling a strange mix of pity and absolute resolve. Terrence had made his choice. As I unlocked my car door, my secure cell phone vibrated violently in my purse. I pulled it out and saw Elias' name flashing on the encrypted screen. I answered immediately. "We have a massive escalation," Elias said, his voice tight with an urgency I had not heard before. "Where are you right now?" "I am getting into my car," I replied, locking the doors as I sat in the leather driver's seat. "What happened?" Elias let out a heavy breath. "Derek did not just move the $500,000 from your trust fund, Sasha. I dug deeper into the Oak Ridge Development financial records. Derek and Chloe submitted a commercial loan application to a federal bank this morning. They used your grandfather trust fund as collateral to secure an additional $2 million in federal funding." My blood ran cold. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. "They cannot use the trust as collateral without my direct authorization." I said, my mind racing through the legal parameters. "I signed a proxy for management, not a full collateral release." "I know," Elias replied grimly. "That is why Derek forged your signature on the federal loan application. I have a digital copy of the submitted paperwork. He copied the signature from your proxy documents and pasted it onto the federal forms." I sat in the quiet parking lot, absorbing the magnitude of what Elias had just revealed. This was no longer a simple case of a cheating husband hiding assets in a messy divorce. This was a direct violation of federal banking laws. Forging a signature on a document submitted to a federally insured financial institution is a felony. Derek had just crossed the line from a manipulative cheat to a federal criminal facing decades in prison. And Chloe was listed as the primary beneficiary of the fraudulent loan, making her a direct accomplice to bank fraud. My brother was now financially tied to an active criminal conspiracy. "I need to see the documents," I told Elias, my voice dropping to a low, steady whisper. "Where can we meet that is completely secure?" Elias gave me the address to a private underground vault facility owned by his corporate law firm. I started the engine and drove across the city, making sure I was not being followed. I navigated through the busy downtown traffic, my mind calculating every legal angle of the impending fallout. I pulled into the dimly lit subterranean parking garage and found Elias waiting for me by a heavy steel door. He swiped a secure key card and led me down a narrow hallway into a soundproof, windowless conference room. The large mahogany table was covered in printed financial logs, bank statements, and printed emails. Elias handed me a thick manila folder. I opened it and stared at the loan application. There it was. My name signed at the bottom of the last page. But Derek had made a catastrophic error. He had traced the exact signature I used on the proxy documents that morning. He copied the misspelled middle name and the broken surname. He literally copied my forensic distress signal onto a federal bank loan application. I let out a sharp, genuine laugh, dropping the heavy paper onto the table. "He is going to federal prison," I said, looking up at Elias. "They all are. They practically handed us the indictments on a silver platter." Elias nodded, leaning against the edge of the table, his arms crossed. "We have enough hard evidence to bury them," he agreed. "But we need to time the execution perfectly. If we freeze the bank accounts right now, Derek might realize he is being investigated and try to flee the country. We need to catch them in a highly public setting where they cannot spin the narrative, manipulate your family, or destroy the remaining financial evidence. They need to feel absolutely invincible right up until the handcuffs click around their wrists." As if on cue, Elias' secure laptop chimed with a loud notification. He walked over and tapped the keyboard, bringing up a new window. "I have been cloning Vanessa text messages since yesterday," he explained, pointing at the screen. "She is currently texting your husband right now." Elias turned the screen toward me so I could read the glowing text bubbles. Vanessa was aggressively complaining to Derek about having to hide their relationship. "I am tired of sneaking around like a secret," Vanessa wrote. "I want to see you in public. I want you to bring your pathetic little wife to the Vivian Charity Gala this weekend." Derek replied immediately, saying he was not sure if that was a good idea given the family dynamics. But Vanessa pressed harder. "Bring her, Derek. I want to wear the diamond necklace you bought me. I want to stand in the exact same room and laugh at her in person while she stands there looking stupid. I want to see the woman we outsmarted." I stared at the glowing screen, reading the cruel words over and over. The charity gala was the biggest social event of the year for my mother, Vivian. It was the night she paraded our family around the local elite to prove how flawless we were. Derek replied to Vanessa a moment later. Fine, he wrote. I will make sure she comes. It will be fun. I looked at Elias and smiled a cold, predatory smile. He wants to bring me to the gala, I said quietly. Then we will give them exactly what they want. I drove back to my house that evening with a clear mind and a steady heart. The plan was set. All I had to do was maintain my innocent facade. I walked into the kitchen and placed my cell phone on the marble counter face down. I pressed a button to activate the hidden voice recorder app my firm used for covert audits. The screen remained black, but the microphone was live and capturing every sound. I started chopping vegetables, waiting for my husband to make his entrance. 30 minutes later, the front door opened. Derek walked heavily down the hallway. He did not greet me with his usual smirk. Instead, he threw his leather briefcase onto the floor and let out a loud, exhausted groan. He loosened his tie, pulled off his suit jacket, and slumped onto a kitchen bar stool. He buried his face in his hands, putting on a spectacular performance. Derek, what is wrong? I asked, keeping my voice pitched higher to sound anxious. You look terrible. Is everything okay? He let out a bitter laugh. No, Sasha. Everything is not okay, he said, his voice laced with manufactured panic. The market completely tanked this afternoon. A massive tech conglomerate filed for bankruptcy, and it sent a shockwave through our portfolios. We took a devastating hit. I stopped chopping the vegetables, playing the role of the terrified wife. What does that mean for us? I asked. You moved my savings into that offshore account to protect it, right? The money is safe. Derek shook his head, looking at me with wide, desperate eyes. That is the problem, he lied smoothly. The offshore account was tied to an investment vehicle that just collapsed. Sasha, we are exposed. The firm is demanding margin calls, and I had to leverage the deed to our house just to keep creditors at bay. If I do not come up with $300,000 in cash by Monday, the bank is going to foreclose. We are going to lose everything. I stared at him in absolute mock horror. He was a complete and utter sociopath. He had already stolen my family trust fund and forged my name on a federal loan. Now he was trying to squeeze even more blood from the stone before the charity gala. Oh my God. Derek, I gasped. What are we going to do? We do not have that kind of cash. He reached across the counter, grabbing my hands. I know we do not, he said urgently. But your grandmother does. She has a massive private estate and a liquid cash reserve. You are her favorite grandchild, Sasha. You need to call her tonight. Tell her we are in a temporary bind, and we just need a $300,000 bridge loan. I pulled my hands away. Derek, I cannot do that. I whimpered. Grandma is in an assisted living facility. I cannot call her and beg for hundreds of thousands of dollars. It would break her heart to know we are failing. Derek slammed his fist on the marble counter. The loud sound was captured perfectly by my hidden phone. Do not act like a fragile little girl right now, Sasha, he yelled, his face turning red with fake outrage. I have carried you financially for 5 years. I have paid for this beautiful house and your comfortable lifestyle. I have done everything for you, and the one time I ask you to step up and help save our marriage, you want to play the victim. If you do not secure that money from your grandmother, I swear to you, I am done. I will pack my bags tonight and leave you with absolutely nothing. You will be out on the street with your precious pride and no husband. He was actually threatening to abandon me if I did not help him steal from an elderly woman. The recording app caught every single threat. Okay, Derek. I cried softly, wiping my eyes. Please do not leave me. I will call her tomorrow morning. I will ask her for the money. Just please tell me we are going to be okay. Derek instantly softened his face, relaxing into a smug, victorious smile. He walked around the counter and pulled me into a hug. Good girl, he whispered, kissing the top of my head. I knew I could count on you. We are going to be just fine. I buried my face in his chest to hide my own smile. He thought he had just secured another payout. He had no idea that my grandmother had legally transferred every single asset she owned directly into my private name 3 years ago. There was absolutely no money for him to steal because I already owned it all. The next morning, Derek left for work feeling completely victorious. He genuinely believed he had successfully extorted another $300,000 from me. I let him kiss my cheek, playing the devoted wife. Once his car disappeared down the street, I dropped the act and quickly got dressed. The charity gala was only 2 days away, and I needed a powerful dress. I drove downtown to an exclusive designer boutique known for dressing the city elite. The store was quiet and smelled of expensive leather. I was browsing through dark emerald silk gowns when someone intentionally shoved their shoulder hard into my back. I stumbled forward, catching my balance on the brass rack. I turned around and came face to face with Vanessa. She looked exactly like the photos Elias had shown me. She wore a tight crimson dress that demanded attention, and her dark hair fell in perfect waves. She did not apologize. Instead, she looked me up and down with a condescending sneer. "Watch where you are standing," she snapped loudly. "Though looking at what you are holding, I suppose you do not belong in this section anyway. That gown is far too expensive for a simple secretary. You should try the discount rack in the back." I kept my expression perfectly neutral. She knew exactly who I was and deliberately tried to provoke me into a public screaming match. She wanted me to act like a crazy, jealous wife to play the victim. I refused to give her satisfaction. "Thank you for the advice," I said politely, keeping my voice calm and measured. "But I think I will stick with this emerald silk." Vanessa scoffed, flipping her dark hair. "Suit yourself," she mocked. But some women just do not know how to keep their men interested. They let themselves fade into the background, while real women get treated like absolute royalty. She stepped closer deliberately, thrusting her chest forward, so I saw what rested against her collarbone. My eyes fell on the jewelry and my breath hitched. It was a massive custom diamond necklace. The central stone was a flawless teardrop cut surrounded by smaller crushed diamonds. I recognized the piece immediately. It was a signature creation from an exclusive European jeweler. The retail price was exactly $150,000. Derek had used my stolen trust fund to buy his mistress a glittering trophy, and she was wearing it to taunt me. "That is a truly stunning necklace," I said, forcing a warm, admiring smile. "The craftsmanship is absolutely exquisite. Your partner must be incredibly generous." Vanessa smiled a nasty, triumphant grin. She thought I was completely clueless. "He is incredibly generous," she bragged, touching the diamonds. "He tells me I am the only woman who deserves the best. He says his actual wife is entirely useless and practically begs him for an allowance." I nodded slowly, acting thoroughly impressed. "Well, he certainly has wonderful taste in jewelry," I replied. "Though if you do not mind me saying, it looks like the setting caught a makeup smudge. It would be a tragedy to wear such a flawless piece without it catching the light perfectly." Vanessa frowned immediately, pulling out a pocket mirror to inspect her chest. The store manager walked over, drawn by our voices. "Oh, we offer complimentary steam cleaning for fine jewelry while our clients shop," the manager offered with a polite smile. "I would be happy to shine that up for you, miss." Vanessa unclasped the necklace with an arrogant wave and dropped it onto the velvet display tray. "Make it quick," she ordered the manager. "I have a very busy schedule today." The manager nodded and turned toward the glass counter. Vanessa became distracted by a rack of expensive fur coats, turning her back to me. This was my window. I walked casually over to the glass counter, pretending to look at designer watches. The manager set the necklace down on the velvet mat to turn on the steam machine. I smoothly pulled my cell phone from my purse, pretending to check a message. I hovered the camera lens directly over the heavy gold clasp. I zoomed in on the microscopic engraving and snapped a high-resolution photo of the serial number. The camera clicked softly, blending into the background music. I quickly slipped the mobile phone back into my heavy leather bag, just as the busy store manager picked the expensive diamond necklace back up from the mat. Vanessa was still admiring her own beautiful reflection in the full-length mirror, remaining completely oblivious to my actions. She truly thought she was successfully humiliating me today, but she had just handed me the final piece of physical evidence the authorities needed to lock Derek away for a decade. I left the luxury boutique with a triumphant smile playing on my lips. As soon as I was safely inside my car, I forwarded the high-resolution photograph of the serial number directly to Elias. He replied within seconds, confirming it matched the exact piece of jewelry Derek purchased with the stolen trust fund money. The final nail in Derek's coffin was officially secured. But I did not have time to celebrate just yet. It was Saturday afternoon, and my mother Vivian was hosting a lavish family cookout at her sprawling suburban estate. I drove to my mother's house and parked behind Terrence's expensive sports car. I walked through the side gate into the massive backyard. The smell of smoked brisket and grilled cedar plank salmon filled the warm afternoon air. My mother had hired a catering staff, but she was still hovering over them, barking orders to ensure everything looked perfect for the country club friends she had invited. Derek was already there holding a craft beer and laughing loudly with Terrence on the limestone patio. I walked over to the shaded lounge area where my sister-in-law Chloe was holding court. She was lounging on a pristine white outdoor sofa, wearing a wide-brimmed sun hat and an oversized designer cover-up. She was completely surrounded by my wealthy church friends, holding a glass of chilled rose and speaking in her loud theatrical voice. "Oh, we are just so exhausted from the city life," Chloe bragged, waving her manicured hand dismissively. "Terrence and I are planning to spend the entire month of August at my family historic estate in the Hamptons. It has been in my family for 4 generations. The property taxes alone are an absolute nightmare, but you simply cannot put a price on that kind of generational legacy and private beach access." The older women nodded in awe, completely enamored by her display of old money wealth. I took a seat on the edge of a nearby wicker chair, crossing my legs and smiling pleasantly. "It truly is a beautiful property, Chloe," I said smoothly, making sure my voice carried over the light jazz music playing from the outdoor speakers. "But I imagine maintaining a legacy property like that must be incredibly stressful right now, especially with the current commercial lending rates fluctuating so aggressively." Chloe paused, her glass of rose hovering near her lips. She looked at me with a mixture of annoyance and confusion. "It is fine, Sasha," she scoffed. "Real wealth does not worry about minor interest rate fluctuations." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. I adopted an expression of innocent curiosity. "Oh, absolutely," I agreed. But I was reading an interesting article about legacy estates in that specific area. Apparently, many old money families fell into the trap of using their historic properties to secure commercial real estate ventures. They take out massive balloon loans with mezzanine debt structures. And when those commercial properties fail to generate revenue, the bank simply triggers a collateral default. I watched the color completely drain from Chloe's face. The smug, arrogant smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of stark, terrifying realization. She stared at me, her mouth slightly open. "It is just so tragic." I continued, shaking my head in mock sympathy. One missed payment, and the bank forecloses on 4 generations of history in a single afternoon. I cannot imagine the social humiliation a family would endure if their private estate was suddenly auctioned off to cover a bad commercial bet. Chloe's knuckles turned stark white as she gripped the stem of her wine glass. She knew I was perfectly describing her exact financial crisis. She looked around frantically to see if the other women understood the specific terminology I had just used. Luckily for her, the older women simply looked bored by the financial jargon. Chloe quickly recovered her posture, though her breathing was noticeably faster. She forced a harsh laugh, trying to regain her footing and reassert her dominance. "Well, it is a good thing my family has top-tier financial advisors," she snapped, her voice trembling slightly. "Not that a simple office secretary would understand how multi-million-dollar assets are actually managed." "Speaking of being useful, Sasha, my glass is empty." Why do you not go over to the catering tent and fetch me another pour of rose, and bring a tray of appetizers for the guests? You always were so good at serving others. She glared at me, waiting for me to submit. I smiled warmly and stood up from my chair. Of course, Chloe, I replied cheerfully. I will get that right away. As I turned to walk toward the catering tent, my phone vibrated heavily in my pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the glowing screen. It was an encrypted notification from my lead auditor, Marcus. The bank transfer cleared Sasha. The debt acquisition is finalized and legally binding. You are now the sole owner of the Oak Ridge Development financial portfolio. I stopped walking and looked back over my shoulder at Chloe, who was nervously sipping the last drop of her wine. I just smiled. I legally owned the banknote to her family historic estate. I held her entire world in the palm of my hand. I left the family cookout shortly after that exchange, claiming I had a terrible migraine. My mother rolled her eyes and told me not to ruin Derek afternoon, but I did not care. I drove straight from the sprawling suburbs to the sleek steel high-rise where my private wealth manager kept his office. The city was quiet on a Saturday afternoon, but my financial team was always on call for me. I walked into the glass-walled conference room where my manager David was already waiting with a thick stack of finalized legal contracts. "Have a seat, Sasha," David said, pushing the documents across the polished mahogany table. I reviewed the final terms of the Oak Ridge Development debt acquisition. You now legally hold the primary note on the $15 million balloon loan. I sat down and picked up the heavy paperwork scanning the financial terms. So when they default next week, what exactly is my legal leverage? I asked, keeping my voice strictly professional. David smiled a sharp, calculating smile. Because they use the Hamptons estate as direct collateral, you bypass the standard foreclosure waiting periods, he explained. The contract includes an immediate liquidation clause. The second they miss the midnight deadline on Friday, you have the absolute legal authority to seize the property and evict the occupants within 24 hours. You do not even have to take them to court. You are the bank now, Sasha. I nodded slowly, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. Chloe had spent years terrorizing me with her old money arrogance, and now her entire identity belonged to a simple office secretary. But I was not finished. David, I need you to execute Phase 2, I said, sliding the documents back to him. I need you to place a hard lock on the grandfather trust fund immediately. Freeze every single asset and block any outgoing wire transfers or physical checks. David frowned, looking slightly concerned. Sasha, if I place a hard lock on that account, any pending transactions will bounce instantly. It will trigger automated fraud alerts across the banking network. I looked him dead in the eye. That is exactly what I want, David. Do it now. David did not ask any more questions. He turned to his secure terminal and typed a series of commands. Within 30 seconds, he hit the enter key and locked the entire trust. The trap was fully armed. Derek had initiated massive wire transfers to Vanessa's offshore account and written heavy checks to Terrence for the fake real estate project. He thought he was moving millions of dollars under the radar. But with the trust fund frozen, every single one of those transactions was about to hit a solid brick wall. The checks would bounce, the wires would fail, and the federal banking system would immediately flag his forged signature for investigating. I thanked David and left the towering office building feeling lighter than I had in years. I drove back to my house and decided to cook a nice dinner. I roasted chicken and prepared a salad, playing the role of the perfect domestic wife. I wanted to be standing right there in the kitchen when Derek's carefully constructed world began to crumble. Derek arrived home a few hours later. He walked into the kitchen carrying his leather briefcase and smelling like expensive scotch. He kissed my cheek and poured himself a glass of water, looking incredibly relaxed. "Dinner smells amazing, sweetheart," he said, leaning against the marble island. "You really know how to take care of me." I smiled warmly, pulling the roasted chicken from the oven. "Only the best for my hard-working husband," I replied. We sat down at the dining table, and Derek began talking enthusiastically about his upcoming promotion. He bragged about his financial genius and how he was securing our future. I nodded along, taking small bites of my food. Suddenly, his cell phone buzzed loudly on the wooden table. He glanced at the screen and frowned slightly. He silenced it and went back to eating. 10 seconds later, it buzzed again. Then again. It was a relentless, continuous vibration. Derek let out an annoyed sigh and picked up the phone. "Sorry, Sasha," he muttered. "It is probably just Terrence panicking over some minor paperwork." He swiped the screen to read the text messages. I watched over the rim of my wine glass as the color rapidly drained from his face. His arrogant posture collapsed. His mouth opened in silent shock. "Is everything okay, Derek?" I asked, looking at him innocently. He did not answer me. His phone began ringing out loud. He stared directly at the caller ID in absolute horror. It was his primary bank. Derek's secret financial accounts were rapidly freezing one by one. Derek stared at the glowing screen, his face entirely devoid of color. He stood up so quickly, his heavy wooden dining chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. The wine in his glass sloshed over the rim, staining the pristine white tablecloth. He did not say a single word to me. He just turned and practically ran out of the dining room, clutching his phone to his ear. I sat calmly at the table, slicing a piece of roasted chicken. I could hear his muffled voice echoing from the downstairs office. He was shouting at a banking representative, demanding to know why his access was completely denied. He sounded frantic, completely stripped of his usual arrogant composure. He begged the person on the other end of the line to bypass the security freeze, but the automated protocols I initiated were ironclad. The frozen trust fund was already suffocating him. He was discovering that the massive financial safety net he relied on to fund his secret life was completely gone. Before I could even finish my meal, the front doorbell rang aggressively. It was not a polite chime, but a rapid succession of rings that signaled extreme impatience. I wiped my mouth with a linen napkin and walked slowly to the foyer. When I opened the heavy front door, my mother Vivian stormed inside before I could even greet her. She was wearing a tailored designer suit, holding a thick binder filled with seating charts and vendor contracts for the charity gala. She had obviously come over to finalize the evening schedule, but she stopped dead in the middle of the hallway. She could hear Derek shouting frantically in the office down the hall. Vivian turned her sharp gaze toward me, her eyes narrowing with instant judgment. "What on earth is going on in this house?" she demanded, pointing a manicured finger toward the office door. "Why is your husband screaming at someone on the phone like a madman?" I kept my expression perfectly innocent and slightly worried. "I do not know, Mom," I replied softly. We were just sitting down to eat dinner and his phone started ringing uncontrollably. He looked completely panicked when he saw the caller ID. I think something might be wrong with his work accounts, or maybe a deal fell through. Vivian did not march down the hall to check on her precious son-in-law. She did not express any concern for our financial well-being or ask if we were in any kind of trouble. Instead, she turned her entire body toward me, her face twisting into a mask of pure resentment. She stepped closer, invading my personal space. "This is your fault, Sasha," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "You are stressing him out." I blinked, pretending to be shocked by the ridiculous accusation. "My fault?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "How is this my fault, Mom? I just cooked him dinner and asked about his day." Vivian slammed her heavy binder down onto the entryway table, making a loud, echoing crack. "Do not play dumb with me," she snapped. "You have been walking around with this miserable attitude all week. You drag your feet when he asks you to sign simple family documents. You make him carry the entire financial burden of this household while you sit back and complain. Derek is a brilliant man managing millions of dollars. He is trying to build a massive legacy for our family, and you are constantly undermining his confidence with your pathetic insecurities. He is probably having a panic attack right now because he knows he has a completely useless wife dragging him down." I stood silently in the hallway, letting her toxic words wash over me. It was absolutely incredible. My husband was currently melting down because he was a federal criminal whose stolen funds had just been seized by the authorities, and my mother still found a way to blame me. Her internalized misogyny and obsession with social appearances blinded her to the very obvious truth standing right in front of her. Vivian crossed her arms over her chest, delivering her final, crushing ultimatum. "The charity gala is tomorrow night," she said, her tone cold and absolute. "Half the city elite will be there. The board of directors, the local politicians, and the church elders. I will not have you embarrass me or your brother in front of our community. I want you to go into that office right now, get on your knees, and apologize to your husband for whatever stress you have caused him today." She leaned in so close I could smell her heavy, expensive perfume. "And let me make one thing perfectly clear, Sasha," she whispered maliciously. "If you do not walk into that ballroom tomorrow night smiling and acting like a supportive black wife, I will personally take the microphone and disown you in front of the entire room. I will make sure everyone knows you are a bitter, ungrateful failure who ruined her own marriage. You will be cut out of this family forever. Do you understand me?" She thought the threat of losing my toxic family would terrify me into submission. She thought I valued her conditional love more than my own dignity. I looked past her shoulder toward the closed office door where Derek was still screaming into his phone. Then I looked my mother dead in the eye. All the fake anxiety melted from my face, leaving behind a calm, terrifying certainty. "I understand completely," I said, my voice perfectly steady. "Do not worry, Mom. At the gala tomorrow night, everyone will see exactly what kind of wife I am." The following evening, the city's most exclusive hotel ballroom was transformed into a paradise of wealth and prestige. It was the annual charity gala and the absolute pinnacle of high society for the local African-American elite. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over tables draped in black velvet and adorned with towering white floral centerpieces. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos glided gracefully through the expansive room, carrying silver trays of expensive champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvres. The room was packed with influential politicians, wealthy church elders, and prominent business moguls. Black excellence was on full display everywhere you looked. But beneath the glamorous surface, the room was a snake pit of gossip and shifting social alliances. My mother Vivian was completely in her element. She wore a shimmering silver gown that reflected the chandelier light beautifully, and she moved through the crowd like royalty. She was the co-chair of the event, and she demanded the unwavering attention of every person she passed. She proudly paraded Derek around the ballroom, treating him like a prized trophy for everyone to admire. I watched them from the shadow of the grand foyer before making my entrance. Derek was playing the part of the successful investment director, but I could clearly see the cracks in his facade. He was sweating profusely under the stiff collar of his expensive tuxedo. He kept compulsively checking his cell phone, hoping his bank accounts had miraculously unfrozen. His smile was strained and his eyes constantly darted toward the exits. Vivian ignored his obvious panic entirely. She dragged him toward a circle of wealthy donors loudly bragging about his financial genius and the massive legacy he was building for our family. Terrence and Chloe stood right beside them, soaking up the residual praise. Chloe wore a conservative pearl-colored dress, trying to project her fake old money aesthetic. She laughed loudly at every joke, clinging to my brother's arm and acting like they owned the entire city. They were a perfect portrait of a toxic, deeply corrupt family standing together on a fragile foundation of stolen money. I did not ride to the gala with Derek. I told him earlier that afternoon I needed more time to get ready and would take a private car. He was too distracted by his collapsing financial web to argue with me. When I finally stepped out of the shadows and stood at the top of the grand staircase, the ambient chatter in the immediate area noticeably dropped. I was not wearing the conservative pale blue dress my mother had ordered me to wear. I had completely shed my plain Jane disguise forever. I wore the custom emerald silk gown I purchased from the boutique. It draped perfectly over my figure, radiating quiet, immense power. My hair was styled in sleek, elegant waves cascading over my bare shoulders. I wore no heavy makeup, just a sharp red lip that contrasted beautifully with my dark skin. I did not look like a timid administrative assistant. I did not look like a woman who needed an allowance from her husband. I looked like a woman who could buy the entire hotel and fire everyone inside it. I walked slowly down the sweeping carpeted staircase. Heads turned rapidly as I passed. Whispers rippled through the crowd of wealthy guests. My mother stopped talking mid-sentence as I approached their circle. Her jaw practically unhinged in shock. She expected a submissive daughter dragging behind her husband, but she was looking at a powerhouse. Derek stared at me in absolute shock. As I stepped into the light, he physically recoiled slightly. He looked at the expensive emerald silk and his eyes widened with confusion and sudden fear. He stepped forward and grabbed my arm, trying to assert his usual physical dominance to ground himself. "What are you wearing, Sasha?" he hissed under his breath, his fingers digging into my skin. "Where did you get that dress? How did you pay for it?" I looked down at his hand, and then up into his terrified eyes. I pulled my arm smoothly but forcefully out of his grip. "I do not break eye contact. I have my own ways of securing exactly what I want, Derek," I said, my voice cold and steady. Derek looked deeply unsettled. He was already drowning in panic over his frozen trust funds and failing bank accounts. Now his compliant, predictable wife was suddenly defying him in public, radiating an authority he could not comprehend. He took a step back, literally intimidated by my sudden confidence. Chloe tried to cut the heavy tension with a snide remark. "Well, someone certainly decided to max out her credit cards tonight," she mocked, but her voice faltered. She could sense the massive shift in the power dynamic. She gripped Terrence's arm, looking nervously at my calm demeanor. My mother stepped forward, her face flushed with anger. She opened her mouth to scold me for being late and defying her strict wardrobe orders. Before she could speak, the heavy double doors of the grand ballroom swung open. The crowd near the entrance parted slightly. A tall, imposing figure walked into the room. It was Elias. He wore a sharp-tailored black tuxedo, looking like a lethal predator stepping into a cage of mice. He was entirely alone. He scanned the crowded ballroom until his cold, dark eyes locked directly onto mine. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. The countdown to their absolute destruction had officially begun. I returned Elias' nod with a slight tip of my champagne flute. Before my mother could unleash her scolding, the heavy doors of the ballroom swung open. The grand entrance pulled the attention of the crowd away from my emerald gown. A woman walked into the dazzling light of the crystal chandeliers. It was Vanessa. She wore a plunging crimson dress that clung to every curve of her body. But it was not the dress that caught the attention of the room. Resting against her collarbone was the massive diamond necklace Derek had purchased with my stolen trust fund. The flawless teardrop diamonds sparkled fiercely, mocking my very existence. Vanessa did not look intimidated by the sea of high society elites. She moved with the arrogant confidence of a woman who believed she had already won the ultimate prize. She scanned the room and locked eyes with Derek. I watched from a short distance as she glided directly toward his circle. Derek looked like he was going to pass out. His face went entirely pale and his eyes darted nervously around the room, searching for me. I quickly stepped backward, slipping behind a towering floral arrangement of white orchids that shielded me from their view, but allowed me to hear every single word. Vanessa stepped right up to Derek, pressing herself dangerously close to his side. She reached out and subtly traced her manicured fingers down the sleeve of his expensive tuxedo jacket. She thought she was being secretive, but anyone paying close attention could clearly see the intimate gesture. Derek flinched physically, stepping back slightly. He was absolutely terrified that I would see them, but Vanessa just smirked. Chloe immediately stepped forward, beaming with delight. She wrapped her arms around Vanessa in a tight theatrical hug. "It is so wonderful to finally see you outside of those stuffy private club meetings," Chloe said loudly enough for the immediate circle to hear. Chloe turned toward my mother. "Vivian, I want to officially introduce you to Vanessa," Chloe announced, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "She is a prominent investor from the city and a very close personal friend of mine." Vivian looked Vanessa up and down, noting the expensive crimson dress and the massive diamond necklace. My mother's eyes lit up with instant approval. Any friend of Chloe is a friend of our family, Vivian purred, extending her hand. I leaned closer to the floral arrangement, holding my breath. Chloe leaned in toward my mother, dropping her voice into a conspiratorial whisper. I set her and Derek up a few months ago, Chloe confessed with a wicked giggle. Derek was getting incredibly bored with Sasha, and I needed to make sure he stayed completely loyal to my family real estate project. Giving him a real woman to keep him entertained was the perfect leverage to ensure he kept funneling that trust fund money exactly where we needed it. I braced myself, expecting my mother to at least show a fleeting moment of maternal outrage. I expected her to defend my marriage even if she disliked me. Instead, my mother let out a soft, approving laugh. Well, men have their needs, Vivian replied smoothly, waving her hand as if discussing the weather. As long as Derek keeps providing for the family estate and elevating our social standing, I do not care what he does in his private time. Sasha is far too simple to keep a powerful man like him satisfied anyway. You did the right thing, Chloe. We need Derek entirely focused on the investments. I stood frozen behind the white orchids. My hands gripped the stem of my champagne flute so tightly, the crystal threatened to shatter. The air rushed out of my lungs. The betrayal was not just a cheating husband. It was a complete systematic execution of my life, orchestrated by the very people who shared my blood. My sister-in-law had intentionally procured a mistress for my husband just to manipulate him into stealing my inheritance. And my own mother, the woman who gave birth to me, had known about the affair and actively endorsed it because she valued a fraudulent real estate deal over her own daughter Hart. They had all conspired to humiliate me, rob me, and break me. They thought I was a pathetic blind fool who would simply smile and quietly serve them appetizers while they destroyed my entire future. I took a deep, slow breath, filling my lungs with cold, absolute resolve. I stepped out from behind the floral arrangement, my emerald gown sweeping across the marble floor. They wanted to play a high-stakes game of total family destruction. I was about to show them exactly how an auditor settles the final score once and for all tonight. I stepped away from the white orchids and gracefully made my way toward our reserved table at the front of the ballroom. The dinner service had just begun, and the clinking of heavy silver cutlery against fine china filled the massive space. I took my seat next to Derek. He was staring blankly at his empty dinner plate, his hands shaking so violently he had to fold them tightly in his lap. He looked exactly like a guilty man standing on the trapdoor of a gallows, just waiting for the heavy wooden lever to be pulled. Terrence and Chloe sat across from us drinking expensive champagne and completely ignoring Derek's silent deterioration. They were too busy admiring themselves in the reflection of their own perceived success. The lights in the ballroom suddenly dimmed. A single bright spotlight illuminated the grand stage at the front of the room. The ambient chatter of the high society crowd immediately faded into respectful silence. My mother, Vivian, walked confidently to the center of the stage. She adjusted the microphone stand with a practiced, elegant smile. She looked out over the sea of wealthy donors, politicians, and church elders, soaking in their undivided attention. "Welcome, everyone, to our annual charity gala," she began, her voice echoing powerfully through the professional sound system. "Tonight we are gathered not just to raise money for our community, but to celebrate the enduring strength of the family unit. We are here to honor the legacy of those who built our foundations and to pass the torch to the strong, capable men who will carry our wealth into the future." The crowd erupted into polite applause. Vivian held up her hands to quiet the room, her smile widening into a mask of pure maternal pride. "Building generational wealth requires absolute focus and brilliant financial leadership," she continued. "It requires men who understand the aggressive nature of the modern market. That is why tonight I am incredibly proud to officially announce a major transition within our own family estate. Effective immediately, my son Terrence and my brilliant son-in-law Derek will be taking full executive control of our family charitable foundation and our grandfather trust fund. Terrence puffed out his chest and raised his champagne glass to the cheering crowd. Derek tried to force a smile, but it looked more like a painful grimace. He knew the trust fund Vivian was bragging about was completely frozen and actively under federal investigation, but he could not say a single word. Vivian was not finished. She turned her sharp gaze away from the crowd and looked directly down at our table. The spotlight shifted slightly, catching the shimmering emerald silk of my gown. My mother's eyes narrowed. She had promised to publicly humiliate me if I did not play the submissive wife, and she was about to deliver on that threat in front of the entire city elite. We all know that managing millions of dollars is an incredibly heavy burden, Vivian said, her tone dripping with thick, condescending sweetness. It is a world of high stakes that can easily overwhelm those who are not built for it. My daughter Sasha has always been a quiet, simple girl who prefers the comfort of her household chores over the complexities of corporate finance. A low murmur rippled through the ballroom. People turned in their seats to look at me. I could feel hundreds of judgmental eyes landing on my face, filled with a mixture of pathetic pity and quiet amusement. Chloe covered her mouth to hide a nasty giggle. Sasha Vivian commanded, leaning closer to the microphone. "Stand up, sweetheart. I want you to stand up right now and publicly thank your wonderful husband. You need to thank Derek for graciously taking the heavy, confusing burden of finances off your fragile shoulders. You are so incredibly lucky to have a strong man protecting you from a world you simply do not understand. Let us give a round of applause for a husband who truly takes care of his wife." The room filled with a slow, polite applause. It was the kind of applause reserved for a small child who had just completed a very basic task. The crowd waited for me to shrink into my seat. They expected me to lower my head, give a weak, embarrassed wave, and submit to my mother crushing public humiliation. Derek reached out under the table and weakly grabbed my wrist, silently begging me to just play along, so the spotlight would move away from him. I looked down at his clammy, trembling hand. I did not lower my head in shame. I did not shrink into the background. Instead, I stood up slowly and purposefully, pushing my chair back. I smoothed the front of my emerald gown, projecting absolute, unshakable confidence. I did not give a weak wave to the crowd. I slowly turned my back on my terrified husband and walked straight up the long center aisle, directly toward the illuminated stage. The click of my heels against the polished marble floor echoed through the dead-silent ballroom. The polite applause had completely stopped. Every single face in the crowd was turned toward me. The wealthy donors, the church elders, and the local politicians watched with wide eyes as I bypassed the podium and walked purposefully up the center aisle. I could hear the panicked scraping of a chair behind me. Derek had jumped up from our table. He practically sprinted up the aisle to catch me before I reached the stage stairs. He stepped directly into my path, blocking my way. His face was slick with cold sweat, and his eyes were wild with absolute terror. He grabbed my elbow, squeezing it hard enough to bruise. "What are you doing, Sasha?" he hissed violently, his voice barely a whisper but laced with pure poison. "Get back to your seat right now. You are embarrassing me. Do not ruin this night for us." I looked down at his hand gripping my arm and then looked directly into his panicked eyes. "I am not ruining anything, Derek," I replied, my voice perfectly level and icy cold. "I am simply following my mother's instructions. She told me to stand up and speak about our finances, so that is exactly what I am going to do." He opened his mouth to argue, but I did not give him the chance. I ripped my arm out of his grasp with a sharp, forceful jerk. I stepped around him, leaving him standing frozen in the middle of the aisle like a terrified little boy. I walked up the carpeted steps to the grand stage. The bright spotlight hit my face, illuminating the emerald silk of my gown. My mother Vivian stood by the microphone stand, looking slightly confused but mostly annoyed. She thought I was coming up to deliver a tearful, submissive speech thanking Derek for being such a wonderful provider. She forced a stiff maternal smile for the audience as I approached her. "Just keep it short, Sasha," Vivian muttered under her breath so the microphone would not pick up her voice. Tell them how much Derek provides for you, and then go sit back down. Do not make this about yourself." I did not reply to her. I simply reached out and took the heavy silver microphone right out of her manicured hand. Vivian blinked in surprise, taking a step back as I took total command of the center stage. I looked out over the sea of faces. I could see Chloe and Terrence sitting at the front table looking incredibly smug. I could see Vanessa standing near the bar wearing the stolen diamond necklace with a condescending smirk on her face. And in the back of the room, I saw Elias leaning against the heavy wooden doors, watching me with intense anticipation. I took a deep breath, letting the silence stretch for just a moment to ensure I had their absolute undivided attention. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice ringing clear and powerful through the massive ballroom speakers. My mother is absolutely right. Managing millions of dollars is an incredibly heavy burden. It requires a specific level of brilliance and a deep understanding of corporate finance. For the past 5 years, my family has believed that I am nothing more than a simple administrative assistant. They believed I was completely blind to the complex financial maneuvers happening right inside my own home. The massive crowd murmured softly, completely confused by my sudden authoritative tone. My mother Vivian shifted uncomfortably behind me, clearly sensing danger. I looked directly down at Derek, who was still standing paralyzed in the center aisle. "But the truth is, I am a forensic accountant," I announced clearly and confidently. "I own and operate a private financial crisis management firm. I spend my days tracking stolen corporate assets and dismantling massive financial fraud rings." So when my mother told me to stand up tonight and thank my husband for taking over my inheritance, I realized I had a professional obligation to fulfill. I think it is only fair I give a brief presentation on exactly where my husband is investing our family money. I reached into the hidden pocket of my emerald gown and pulled out a small black presentation clicker. I aimed it at the control booth in the back of the room and pressed the main button. The giant LED screens behind the stage, meant for charity slideshows, suddenly went entirely black. A second later, they flared back to life, illuminating the entire stage. But they were no longer displaying the usual boring local charity foundation logos. The massive screens were now broadcasting high-definition bank statements and wire transfer logs for the entire city elite to see. The collective gasp from the audience was so loud it sounded like the air had been suddenly sucked right out of the massive ballroom. I pointed the small remote at the giant glowing screens overhead. "As you can see, ladies and gentlemen, my husband has been incredibly busy managing our family estate," I announced, my voice echoing with absolute authority across the room. "Right here on the left side of the screen is the grandfather trust fund my mother was just bragging about. And on the right side is the destination of a highly classified wire transfer totaling exactly $500,000. The wealthy crowd began to murmur loudly as they read the glowing numbers displayed in high definition. "The destination account does not belong to any local charity or legitimate investment firm," I explained, pacing slowly across the wooden stage. "It is an offshore shell company, explicitly registered to a woman named Vanessa." Derek finally broke out of his terrified paralysis. The reality of his public exposure shattered his polished facade entirely. He scrambled up the stage stairs, his face completely red with blind panic and rage. "Give me that microphone right now, Sasha," he yelled, reaching out to grab me and shut down the presentation. But before his hand could even brush against my emerald silk gown, a massive figure stepped directly between us. Elias moved out of the heavy shadows with terrifying speed and precision. He did not say a single word to my frantic husband. He simply grabbed Derek by the lapels of his expensive tuxedo and shoved him hard backward. Derek stumbled clumsily over his own feet and crashed heavily onto the wooden stage floor. Elias stood firmly over him, smoothing his own tailored suit jacket with absolute calm. "Stay exactly where you are," Elias ordered, his voice a deep, menacing rumble that carried across the stage, even without a microphone. The elite crowd watched this physical altercation in absolute stunned silence. My mother, Vivian, was gripping the wooden podium, her knuckles completely white, entirely unable to comprehend what was happening to her perfect evening. I did not look back at Derek cowering on the floor. I kept my eyes locked on the captive audience, addressing them like a seasoned federal prosecutor delivering a devastating opening statement. Vanessa is not a licensed financial broker. I continued, projecting my voice effortlessly over the rising whispers. She is my husband's secret mistress. My sister-in-law, Chloe, actually introduced them specifically to ensure Derek would remain fiercely loyal to her own desperate financial schemes. I gestured directly toward the front table where Chloe was now visibly shaking and shrinking into her velvet seat. The money stolen directly from my grandfather trust fund was funneled through Vanessa straight into the Oak Ridge Development Corporation to secretly bail out Chloe bankrupt family estate. People sitting at the lavish dining tables began pointing and whispering frantically to one another. Politicians and church elders, who had just been praising my family business acumen, were now staring at Terrence and Chloe with absolute open disgust. Terrence slowly looked at his wife, his face pale and contorted with sudden, horrifying realization. He was finally connecting the hidden dots. He realized the $800,000 he had eagerly given Derek from his own second mortgage was completely gone, swallowed by the exact same fraudulent black hole. Chloe tried to stand up and loudly deny the accusations, but her shrill voice was completely drowned out by the rising noise of the angry, betrayed crowd. "Sit down and remain quiet." "Chloe," I commanded sharply, my voice easily cutting through the ballroom chaos. "I am not finished presenting the family investment portfolio just yet." I confidently aimed my remote and pressed the primary control button one more time. The massive screen flashed brightly, and a new, highly detailed legal document appeared. This was not a simple private bank statement or a wire transfer log. It bore the heavy official seal of a federally insured financial institution. Derek groaned miserably from the cold stage floor, burying his sweating face in his shaking hands. "Stealing money from a private family trust is a terrible personal betrayal," I explained, my tone turning deadly serious and cold. "But forging an authorized signature on a loan application to illegally secure $2 million in federal funding is a severe corporate felony." I pointed straight to the bottom of the glowing document. "And right down here, you can see the signatures of the two primary beneficiaries who knowingly submitted this fraudulent loan application." The massive screen slowly zoomed in on the bottom of the page, displaying the ink signatures for the entire ballroom to read. It was the undeniable absolute proof of their massive federal crime, clearly signed by Derek and Chloe. The silence in the ballroom shattered into a million pieces. The collective realization of what I had just shown them sparked an absolute uproar. Wealthy donors and church elders began shouting over one another, pointing fingers at the front table where Terrence sat frozen in horror. But the loudest noise came from the back of the room near the bar. Vanessa pushed her way through the crowd, her face twisted into a mask of pure desperation. "That is a complete lie," Vanessa screamed, her voice echoing shrilly over the chaos. "She is making all of this up. Those documents are completely fake. She is just a bitter, jealous wife trying to ruin her husband because he does not love her anymore." Vanessa stood on her tiptoes, trying to project absolute confidence, but her hands were trembling. She thought she could simply gaslight an entire room of high society elites the same way she and Derek had tried to gaslight me. Down at the front table, Chloe was having a completely different reaction. She did not try to stand her ground and fight. She knew exactly what federal bank fraud meant. She grabbed the edges of her pearl-colored dress and scrambled out of her velvet chair, pushing past her husband, Terrence. "Get out of my way!" Chloe shrieked, knocking a crystal wine glass off the table. It shattered loudly against the marble floor. "She is crazy. Sasha has lost her mind. I am not staying here to listen to the delusions of a psychotic woman." Chloe shoved a waiter aside, frantically trying to make a run for the side exit of the ballroom. But the crowd of angry, betrayed investors and socialites had already formed a tight wall. They did not move. They glared at her, blocking her path completely. Chloe backed away, her chest heaving as she realized there was nowhere left to run. I stood on the stage completely unbothered by their pathetic outbursts. I raised the presentation clicker once again and aimed it at the control booth. Fake documents. I asked, my voice cutting through the noise with chilling calmness. That is a very bold claim, Vanessa. Let us look at something a little more tangible then. Something you are wearing right now. I pressed the button. The massive LED screens behind me transitioned instantly. The federal loan application vanished. In its place, a massive high-definition photograph appeared. It was the picture I had taken at the designer boutique. The image showed a close-up of a heavy gold clasp attached to a diamond necklace. As you can see, this is a macro photograph of the clasp on a custom diamond piece, I explained, pacing across the stage. Right there, engraved in the gold, is a unique identifying serial number. I clicked the remote again. A split screen appeared. On the left was the serial number from the necklace. On the right was an official receipt from the European jeweler, dated exactly 1 day after the $500,000 wire transfer was initiated from my frozen trust fund. The serial numbers matched perfectly. The purchase price was listed at exactly $150,000. If you look closely at the woman screaming in the back of the room, you will notice she is currently wearing that exact same necklace, I announced, pointing directly at Vanessa. She is literally wearing the stolen assets of my family trust fund around her neck. The entire ballroom turned in unison to look at Vanessa. Hundreds of eyes locked onto the glittering teardrop diamond resting against her collarbone. Vanessa gasped, her hands flying up to cover her neck as if she had just been burned by the diamonds. The arrogant sneer completely vanished from her face, replaced by utter humiliation and stark terror. She tried to step backward into the shadows, but the guests around her physically stepped away, leaving her entirely isolated in a circle of empty space. She looked around wildly, searching for Derek to save her. But Derek was still cowering on the stage floor, guarded by Elias. There was no one left to manipulate. The brilliant financial web they had spun to destroy me had been completely untangled and wrapped tightly around their own throats. My mother Vivian stood near the podium, her face buried in her hands, weeping loudly over the complete destruction of her social empire. She cared only about the massive scandal instead of her own daughter. Before anyone else spoke, a sudden heavy thud echoed from the back of the room. The heavy oak doors of the grand ballroom swung wide open, hitting the walls with a crash. The dark foyer was suddenly illuminated by brilliant flashing red and blue lights reflecting sharply off the crystal chandeliers above our heads. 6 federal agents wearing dark windbreakers with bright yellow letters printed across their backs strode purposefully into the room. The elegant string quartet playing softly in the corner abruptly stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the heavy, authoritative footsteps of the agents marching across the polished marble floor. The crowd of wealthy socialites, politicians, and church elders immediately parted, creating a wide, clear path. No one wanted to be standing anywhere near the targets of a federal raid. Elias stepped down from the grand stage, leaving Derek cowering on the floor. He walked slowly and deliberately toward the back of the room, where his wife Vanessa was standing completely frozen in terror. Vanessa saw him approaching, and her confident, arrogant demeanor entirely disintegrated. She reached her shaking hands out toward him, her voice cracking as she tried to salvage the situation. "Elias, please," she begged, tears streaming down her perfectly contoured face. "You have to listen to me. He forced me to do it. Derek manipulated me into holding that money. I did not know it was stolen from his wife." Elias did not show a single ounce of pity. His face remained carved from cold, hard stone. He did not yell or create a scene. He simply reached inside his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick, folded stack of legal documents. He shoved them aggressively into her trembling hands. "I am not a fool, Vanessa," Elias said, his deep voice carrying clearly through the silent ballroom. "Those are official divorce papers. I have already locked you out of our house and frozen every joint account we share." Attached to the divorce decree is a formal civil lawsuit filed by my corporate firm. You are being sued for embezzlement and money laundering. You are going to leave this marriage with absolutely nothing, and you will spend the next 10 years trying to pay back the legal fees. He turned his back on her without waiting for a response, leaving her sobbing hysterically, clutching the papers against the stolen diamond necklace. While Elias handled his treacherous wife, the lead federal agents marched directly toward the illuminated stage. Derek saw them coming, and a primal panic took over his body. He scrambled backward across the wooden floor like a cornered animal, desperately trying to put distance between himself and the authorities. He bumped hard into the wooden podium, nearly knocking my mother over. He looked out at the sea of faces, searching for anyone to shield him. But high society operates on self-preservation. No one stepped forward. No one spoke in his defense. Derek realized he was entirely out of options, so he resorted to the only tactic he knew, which was throwing someone else under the bus to save himself. "Wait!" Derek screamed loudly, pointing a shaking finger frantically toward the front table. "You do not understand! I am not the only one involved in this. You need to arrest Terrence. He is my brother-in-law, and he gave me $800,000 to fund the real estate scheme. It was his idea to use the money for the Oak Ridge project, and Chloe forced me to do it. Her family was bankrupt, and she threatened to ruin my career if I did not forge the loan documents to save her historic estate. I was just following their instructions." The crowd let out a collective gasp of pure disgust. Terrence stood up from his chair, his face twisting into a mask of absolute hatred and betrayal. He had blindly defended Derek against me. He had taken out a second mortgage on his own home to support him. And the very second Derek faced consequences, he instantly tried to feed Terrence to the federal authorities. Chloe buried her face in her hands, sobbing loudly as the social standing she worshipped went up in flames. The lead FBI agent did not care about Derek and his pathetic excuses. He stepped onto the stage, reached down, and grabbed Derek roughly by the collar of his expensive tuxedo jacket. He hauled him to his feet with incredible force, spinning him around and pressing his chest hard against the wooden podium. Derek let out a sharp cry of pain as the agent forcefully pulled his arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of steel handcuffs echoed loudly through the silent ballroom, snapping securely around his wrists. "Derek, you are under arrest," the lead agent announced, his authoritative voice booming over the stunned crowd. "You are being charged with federal wire fraud, grand larceny, and the forgery of documents submitted to a federally insured financial institution. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Derek stopped struggling against the cold steel handcuffs cutting into his wrists. The reality of the Miranda rights washed over him, completely shattering the arrogant illusion he had built his entire life upon. He was no longer the brilliant investment director or the flawless son-in-law my mother worshipped. He was just a common criminal caught in a trap of his own making. He looked out at the sea of wealthy donors and community leaders who had been applauding him just 10 minutes ago. Now they were staring at him with absolute contempt and morbid fascination. Whispers rippled through the ballroom like a fast-moving current. Derek turned his head frantically, searching the stage until his bloodshot eyes locked onto mine. He fell to his knees, hitting the hard wooden floor with a loud thud. The federal agents held him firmly by the arms, but they allowed him to drop. He looked up at me, and the last remnants of his pride evaporated. Tears began streaming down his face, mixing with the cold sweat on his forehead. "Sasha, please," he begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic, wet sob. "Please tell them this is a huge misunderstanding. Tell them we were just moving the money temporarily. You are my wife. We took vows. You cannot let them take me away like this. I will give it all back. I will fix it. Just call them off and tell them you authorized the signature." I stood perfectly still, looking down at the man I had spent 5 years of my life with. He was crying openly, snot running from his nose, his expensive tuxedo wrinkled and ruined. He was begging me to commit federal perjury just to save him from the consequences of his own greed. He actually believed he could still manipulate my emotions. He thought the quiet, submissive woman he had continuously belittled would suddenly step forward and throw herself onto his sword. I slowly descended the 2 wooden steps to stand on the main stage floor directly in front of him. I looked down into his desperate, pleading eyes. I did not feel an ounce of pity. I felt entirely liberated. "I cannot call them off, Derek," I said, my voice perfectly calm and devoid of any emotion. "Because I am the one who handed them the evidence. I am the one who traced the offshore accounts. I am the one who flagged the forged signatures on the federal loan applications." Derek shook his head wildly, unable to process the words. "But you do not know how to do that," he cried out. "You are just a secretary. You do not understand any of this." I leaned down slightly, my emerald silk gown brushing against the floor. "I am not a secretary," I replied, staring straight into his soul. "I am a forensic accountant, Derek. I own a firm that specializes in tearing down financial criminals exactly like you. You spent 5 years treating me like I was stupid because it made you feel powerful. But your arrogance made you careless. You left a digital paper trail a mile wide. You did not just cheat on your wife, you tried to rob the auditor." Derek gasped as the weight of my words finally crushed him. The woman he had relentlessly underestimated had meticulously engineered his complete and total destruction. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out, except a hollow, broken wheeze. "Take him out of here," the lead federal agent ordered sharply, pulling Derek back up to his feet. Derek's legs gave out entirely. He could not even walk under his own power. 2 strong agents had to hook their arms under his armpits and physically drag him across the stage. His expensive leather shoes dragged uselessly across the polished wood. The elite crowd parted instantly, creating a wide, silent aisle for his humiliating exit. Hundreds of local socialites, church elders, and politicians watched in absolute silence as the golden boy of the community was hauled out of the grand ballroom like a sack of garbage. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind them, sealing his fate. The ballroom remained completely silent. Flashing red and blue lights cast eerie shadows across the crystal chandeliers. The federal agents had removed the primary target, but there was still a massive open wound bleeding out at the front table. I turned my back on the exit and walked slowly to the very edge of the stage. The bright spotlight followed my movements. I looked directly down at the velvet chairs where my brother Terrence sat, in stunned horror. And right next to him, trembling uncontrollably, was Chloe. I smiled a cold, dangerous smile. I was not finished yet. Chloe saw me looking directly at her and instantly shifted her strategy. The arrogant, wealthy heiress vanished entirely. In her place was a fragile, tearful victim. She threw her arms around Terrence, burying her face against his chest. "Terrence, you have to protect me," Chloe sobbed loudly, her voice echoing in the quiet room. "Sasha is trying to frame me. I swear I had no idea what Derek was actually doing. He told me it was just standard investment paperwork for the foundation. You know I would never do anything to hurt your family. Please, Terrence, tell them she is lying." Terrence looked down at his wife. His face was pale and his mind was clearly fracturing under the weight of the massive betrayal. He instinctively wrapped one arm around her shoulders, wanting to believe her tears were genuine. He looked up at me with pleading eyes, silently begging me to stop. He had already lost his $800,000 investment. He did not want to lose his marriage in front of the entire city elite. I refused to give him that mercy. True healing requires complete amputation of the infected tissue. I raised the presentation clicker and pressed the button one final time. The massive screens behind me flashed brightly, replacing the forged federal loan documents with a highly detailed legal deed. It was the official property deed to the historic Hamptons estate that Chloe used to assert social dominance. Stamped diagonally across the document in bright red digital ink was a massive notice of default. "You are a phenomenal actress, Chloe," I said, projecting clearly through the sound system. "But your tears cannot erase public financial records. You did not just sign those loan applications. You orchestrated the entire fraud. You needed my family trust fund because your own family is completely destitute. The crowd gasped again, leaning forward in their seats. Chloe stopped fake crying and froze. She slowly turned her head to look at the massive screens overhead. Her perfect pale complexion turned a sickly shade of gray. Your precious old money ran out a decade ago, Chloe, I declared into the microphone, my words hitting her hard. Your parents leveraged every single asset they owned to fund their failing commercial developments. The Oak Ridge Development Corporation was nothing more than a desperate shell game designed to hide a massive $15 million balloon loan. And that loan matured yesterday. You pushed my husband into a federal crime because you needed my money to save your parents from total bankruptcy. Chloe opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. She looked around the room, realizing every wealthy donor and socialite was looking at her with absolute disgust. The illusion of her superiority was completely shattered. But here is the most interesting part of the corporate acquisition process. I continued pacing slowly. When a borrower defaults on a heavily collateralized commercial loan, the bank sells that toxic debt to a buyer. I met with my wealth manager yesterday afternoon. I bought your family $15 million debt portfolio, Chloe. I am now your sole legal creditor. A collective murmur of shock rippled through the ballroom. Even my mother Vivian stopped crying and stared at me in pure disbelief. I held absolute power over the woman who had tormented me for years. Because you used the Hamptons estate as direct collateral, I do not have to wait for a court battle, I explained, my voice dropping. The contract includes an immediate liquidation clause. You have exactly 24 hours to vacate the Hamptons estate before my foreclosure team arrives to seize the property and change the locks. Your family is officially homeless. Chloe let out a blood-curdling shriek. No, she screamed, lunging forward against the table. You cannot do this. You are just a pathetic little secretary. You cannot take my family home. Terrence looked at the screen and then looked down at his wife. The final piece of the puzzle slammed into place. Chloe had never loved him. Her wealthy racist family had never accepted him. They tolerated his presence because they saw him as a convenient mark. They used his money and his marriage to quietly bail out their sinking ship. Terrence realized he had sacrificed his relationship with me just to fund the lifestyle of people who secretly despised him. Chloe reached out to grab his hand again, seeking comfort. Terrence, protect me, she cried. Terrence stared at her reaching hand. His face hardened into absolute stone. He did not reach back. Instead, Terrence slowly dropped her hand, letting her arm fall to her side. He stepped away from her, leaving her completely isolated. He finally realized his wife had used him and his sister to save her own bankrupt racist family. Terrence turned his back on Chloe, completely walking away from the table without saying a single word. He disappeared into the crowd, leaving his weeping wife alone amidst the shattered glass and ruined velvet chairs. The entire ballroom had descended into a chaotic symphony of shocked whispers and frantic phone calls. The city elite were already texting their circles, spreading the massive scandal that had just detonated in the middle of the most exclusive charity gala of the decade. The pristine image of our flawless, affluent family was completely incinerated in a matter of minutes. I lowered the microphone, clicking the remote one last time to plunge the massive screens behind me into total darkness. My work here was done. I turned to walk toward the stage stairs, but a sudden frantic movement caught my eye. My mother Vivian was scrambling up the wooden steps. Her perfectly styled hair was disheveled, and her shimmering silver gown looked heavy and awkward on her shaking frame. Her face was streaked with dark mascara, tears running freely down her cheeks. But as she rushed toward me, I quickly realized she was not crying out of sorrow for the betrayal I had just endured. She was crying in absolute terror over her own destroyed reputation. Sasha. Vivian gasped, grabbing my forearms with a desperate, bruising grip. What have you done? You have completely ruined everything. You need to fix this right now. You need to get back on that microphone and tell all these people that this was just some horrible misunderstanding. I stared at her manicured hands, gripping my bare skin. I did not pull away immediately. I just let her frantic energy wash over me, analyzing the sheer depth of her delusion. Fix this, Mom, I asked, my voice dangerously calm. Derek is currently sitting in the back of a federal vehicle facing decades in prison for wire fraud. Chloe family is entirely bankrupt and facing eviction by tomorrow morning. There is absolutely nothing left to fix. The rot has been entirely removed. Vivian shook me, her eyes wide and wild with panic. "You do not understand," she cried, her voice bordering on a hysterical shriek. "My friends are out there. The church elders are watching us. The board of directors will strip me of my chair position by tomorrow morning. You have made us a laughingstock in front of the entire city. You could have handled this quietly at home, Sasha. You could have divorced him privately and let us manage the narrative. But you just had to be selfish. You had to stand up here and embarrass your own family in front of everyone who matters." She was actually blaming me. My husband had stolen my inheritance, forged my signature, and publicly humiliated me with his mistress. My sister-in-law had orchestrated the entire criminal enterprise. And my mother, who knew about the affair and encouraged it to protect a fraudulent investment, was now standing on a stage demanding I apologize for ruining her party. I reached up and firmly grabbed my mother's wrists. I peeled her hands off my arms with slow, deliberate strength, pushing her away from me. "I am not apologizing for defending myself, Vivian," I said, dropping the title of mother forever. "I spent my entire life shrinking myself down just to make you comfortable. I wore the plain clothes you picked out. I married the arrogant man you chose for me. I played the submissive, quiet daughter so you could parade around the country club and brag about your perfect family. And the moment those people decided to bleed me dry, you gladly handed them the knife." Vivian opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off, my voice echoing coldly across the empty stage. "You knew Derek was cheating on me," I stated, stating the absolute undeniable fact. "You knew Chloe was manipulating him. You watched them steal my grandfather money, and you smiled because you thought it elevated your social standing. You sold your own daughter to a group of criminals just to maintain the illusion of high society wealth." Vivian stumbled backward, covering her mouth with her trembling hand. "Sasha, please," she sobbed, realizing her manipulation tactics were completely useless. "Do not do this. We are blood. We are family." I looked her dead in the eye, feeling nothing but pure liberating indifference. "You wanted a perfect family image more than you wanted a daughter," I said, delivering the final crushing blow. "Now you have neither." I turned my back on her for the last time. I walked gracefully down the wooden stairs, my emerald silk gown trailing elegantly behind me. The sea of wealthy donors and socialites parted instantly, creating a wide, silent path for me to exit. No one dared to speak. No one dared to look me in the eye. They simply watched in awe as I walked straight through the massive oak doors, leaving the toxic ruins of my past behind. I left Vivian standing completely alone on the dark stage, weeping hysterically into her hands as her entire social empire crumbled into dust around her. That night, the city elite watched my mother fall from grace, and they did not offer her a single hand to help her back up. The charity gala was the sudden, explosive end to my life as a submissive, naive wife. I walked out of that hotel and never looked back. Fast forward exactly 6 months. The dust had completely settled over the smoldering ruins of my former life. Derek and Vanessa were no longer wearing expensive silk and custom diamonds. They were both currently wearing matching federal-issue jumpsuits. The trial had been swift and brutally public. Derek tried to secure a plea bargain by turning on his CO conspirators, but the digital paper trail I handed the FBI was entirely bulletproof. The judge showed zero leniency for his arrogant financial crimes. Derek wept openly in the courtroom when he was sentenced to 8 solid years in federal prison for wire fraud and forgery. Vanessa, the arrogant mistress who thought she had secured a lifetime of luxury, received 5 years as a direct accomplice to embezzlement. Elias made sure her divorce proceedings left her completely destitute before the criminal sentencing even happened. She walked into federal custody without a single penny to her name. As for Chloe, the old money heiress, her spectacular downfall was the talk of the financial district for weeks. My foreclosure team evicted her bankrupt parents from the historic Hamptons estate the very next morning, just as I promised. I stood on the sidewalk and watched the moving trucks haul away generations of their stolen pride. Terrence filed for a vicious expedited divorce, entirely disgusted by how she had used him to fund her racist family. He was broke and humiliated, living in a tiny studio apartment while he worked overtime to pay off his massive second mortgage. Chloe, with no trust fund, no husband, and no social standing, was last seen working the perfume counter at a mid-tier retail department store downtown. She had to smile and spray samples for the exact same high society women she used to mock. My mother Vivian vanished from the social scene, entirely retreating into her sprawling suburban home as a total pariah. Her beloved church elders and board directors had officially excommunicated her to protect their own reputations. She was completely alone. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of my sleek, high-rise office, looking out over the sprawling city skyline. The morning sun reflected off the glass towers, casting a warm, brilliant light across my massive desk. I had officially launched my financial crisis management firm to the public, and the response was overwhelming. The waitlist for my specialized auditing services was already backed up for 2 years. I was no longer hiding behind a plain wardrobe or a secret identity in a hidden downtown cubicle. I wore a sharp, tailored cream suit, and I commanded absolute respect in every room I entered. I employed a team of 30 brilliant analysts, and we were the most feared forensic accounting firm on the entire East Coast. The frosted glass door of my office swung open, and my assistant smiled brightly. "Elias is here to see you," she announced, stepping aside. Elias walked in wearing his usual impeccably tailored dark suit. He carried a bottle of incredibly rare scotch and 2 heavy crystal glasses. "We won the appellate court ruling this morning," Elias said, setting the heavy bottle down on my polished mahogany desk. "Vanessa's legal team tried to appeal the civil embezzlement charges, but the judge threw it out immediately. The victory is absolute, Sasha. We drained every last drop of the poison." I smiled, walking over to the desk. I poured 2 small measures of the rich amber liquid into the crystal glasses. I handed one to Elias, and we clinked them together in a quiet moment of mutual respectful solidarity. We had both been deeply betrayed by the people we trusted most, but we had weaponized our grief and turned it into an impenetrable fortress. "To absolute victories," I said, taking a slow, deliberate sip. The scotch burned perfectly, sliding smoothly down my throat. Elias nodded in agreement, taking his drink. "To absolute victories," he echoed. He gave me a brief, respectful nod, acknowledging the massive empire I had built before turning and leaving the office to head back to his own corporate firm. I walked back over to the towering glass window and looked out at the city moving far below me. I took a deep breath of the crisp, conditioned air. The toxic husband, the poisonous mother, the manipulative sister-in-law, and the arrogant mistress were all entirely gone from my world. They had tried to break me down and bury me under the weight of their own selfish greed. But they forgot that seeds grow best in the dark. I had lost a deeply flawed marriage and a corrupt family, but I had gained something infinitely more valuable. I had gained absolute, unshakable freedom. I built an empire with my own 2 hands. The ultimate clapback was never just about executing the perfect financial revenge against those who wronged me. It was finally choosing myself. The most powerful lesson to draw from Sasha's journey is the profound importance of refusing to shrink yourself to accommodate the toxic insecurities of others. Throughout the narrative, Sasha's husband, mother, and sister-in-law systematically underestimated her. They confused her quiet endurance with foolishness and her enforced submission with weakness. They built their entire fraudulent empire on the assumption that she would always prioritize their comfort and social image over her own dignity. However, Sasha's ultimate triumph was not merely the meticulous dismantling of their financial crimes. Her true victory was an internal one. She realized that trying to appease people who are committed to misunderstanding and using you is a battle you will always lose. In reality, we may not be forensic accountants uncovering multi-million-dollar federal fraud schemes, but the emotional dynamics remain deeply relatable. We frequently encounter individuals, sometimes even family members, who demand we play a lesser role so they can feel superior. They weaponize guilt, obligation, and social expectations to keep us confined to boxes of their own making. Sasha's story teaches us that true empowerment requires radical boundaries. It demands the courage to stop seeking validation from environments that actively drain your worth. Setting these boundaries can be a lonely and painful process, especially when it involves severing ties with the very people who are supposed to support you. Yet removing toxic influences is the only way to clear the ground for your own genuine success and peace of mind. You owe absolutely nothing to those who only value you for what they can extract from your life. Take a hard look at your own relationships today and firmly reclaim the power you have been quietly giving away to those who do not deserve it.